In the ICU hallway, my daughter whispered, "Don't sign anything." Her voice was so low, it barely rose above the hum of the machines behind the heavy doors. I held the envelope already in my hand, the one the nurse had slid toward me with careful eyes. The pen pressed against my thumb, a cold reminder that I was supposed to hesitate, supposed to wait, supposed to obey the warning whispered by the very child I had raised. But I didn't. I signed once. Then again. 2 loops of my name, steady enough to betray none of the shaking inside me. I sealed the envelope, pressed it flat with the heel of my palm, and only then did I look up at her. She was staring at me with a mixture I had never seen before, disappointment that carried a trace of fear, and something colder than either of those. "Why?" she mouthed, though no sound followed. I didn't answer. My hand hovered over the smooth white flap, the glue still warm, as if it were sealing not just paper but an entire part of my life. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and panic. Families shuffled by in various states of grief, some with styrofoam cups of coffee gone cold, others clutching rosaries or folded papers like lifelines. A baby cried somewhere far off. My daughter folded her arms across her chest and stepped back, leaning against the wall the way her father used to lean when he'd had enough of a conversation. I felt, absurdly, as if she had inherited not just his jawline but his refusal to soften. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her that there are moments when silence is more dangerous than action, that sometimes you sign not because you are certain, but because you cannot stand another minute of waiting in a place where the ceiling buzzes and the clocks tick louder than heartbeats. But the words stuck. I kept my lips pressed tight because I knew that whatever I said then would be remembered long after the envelope was forgotten. She turned her head toward the double doors of the ICU. "You shouldn't have done that," she said finally, out loud this time, her voice clearer, harder. I thought of her as a child, hair tangled from sleep, standing at the kitchen table asking me why I always signed her permission slips without reading them. "Because I trust you," I used to say. And she would laugh, proud of the power that trust carried. Now, years later, in this fluorescent hallway, that same girl was warning me against trust, against instinct, against myself. The nurse returned. She reached for the envelope with professional calm, but her eyes lingered a second longer than protocol demanded. I let go of it, watched it slip from my fingers, and felt lighter and heavier all at once. My daughter's arms tightened across her chest. She didn't speak again. Not then. We sat together on the hard plastic chairs, mother and daughter, 2 women bound by blood but divided by something neither of us could name. Time moved differently in those chairs, elastic and cruel. I studied the floor tiles, the scuffs that told stories of countless other families, other envelopes, other whispered warnings. She scrolled through her phone with quick, sharp motions, the glow illuminating her face in harsh blue. At one point she sighed so loudly it made an older man across from us lift his head. He gave me a look of quiet sympathy before returning to his folded newspaper. That look, brief, wordless, felt more forgiving than anything I'd received from my own child all evening. Finally, I said, I did what I thought was right. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. "That's always your answer, isn't it?" The words stung. Always. As if my entire life had been a collection of selfish signatures, reckless decisions made without her consent. Maybe in her eyes it had been. I leaned back, trying to ease the ache in my shoulders, but the chair creaked as if mocking me. I thought of the papers inside that envelope. They weren't just medical consent forms or billing agreements. They were choices, some final, some reversible, but all weighted with consequence. I had signed them because someone had to, and because I was tired of being told to wait. But sitting there beside my daughter, I wondered if I had signed away more than documents. Perhaps I had signed away a piece of her trust. The ICU doors swung open and a doctor walked through, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the hallway for the right family. He didn't stop at us. He walked on, delivering news to someone else. I watched the exchange, the nodding heads, the tears. My daughter glanced up too, then back at her phone, as if refusing to witness another family's collapse. It was strange, the way moments of other people's grief intruded on your own. A chorus of suffering in which you were just one voice, not special, not singled out, just another part of the endless hum. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about my husband, her father, lying beyond those double doors. Machines keeping him in a rhythm that nature no longer would. His body, once so firm, so commanding, now a fragile geography of wires and tubes. When I signed that envelope, I had signed with him in mind, not with her disapproval in my ears. I had signed because he had always trusted me to decide, to carry the weight he could not. But my daughter didn't see it that way. To her, it was betrayal. A mother choosing for herself rather than for the family. And maybe she was right. Maybe, for once, I had chosen what I could bear instead of what she wanted. The night stretched on. We took turns getting coffee, though neither of us finished our cups. She paced the hallway. I remained seated, hands folded neatly in my lap, as if I were waiting for a job interview rather than a verdict on a life. Nurses moved in and out, their shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. I envied their purpose. They knew what to do. They had steps, routines, checklists. All I had was the echo of her whisper, "Don't sign anything." I replayed it again and again. Why had she said it? What did she fear I would commit to? Did she think I was careless? Did she think I didn't understand the weight of what I was doing? Or was it something deeper, that she wanted control, that she wanted to be the one holding the pen? At one point she dropped into the chair beside me with a frustrated sigh. "You don't listen. You never listen." "I listen," I said quietly. "I just don't always agree." She turned her head sharply toward me, eyes wide, as though I had confessed to a crime. Then she shook her head, muttering something I couldn't quite catch. The silence after that was thicker, heavier. I let it sit between us because I had no strength left to break it. Around dawn, when the hallway had emptied of most families, when the vending machine hummed louder than conversation, the doctor finally called us in. My daughter stood quickly, smoothing her sweater, already bracing herself. I rose more slowly, my knees stiff. We followed him through the double doors, into the realm of beeping monitors and muted voices. My husband lay pale against the white sheets. His chest rose and fell mechanically, the rhythm too precise to be natural. Tubes traced his body like unfamiliar veins. I felt my daughter's hand brush mine as we stepped closer, but she pulled it back immediately, as if touch itself had become too complicated. The doctor spoke in careful sentences, each one designed to cushion the impact. He explained what had been done overnight, what hadn't worked, what decisions lay ahead. My daughter nodded briskly, questions sharp, efficient. I stood still, my eyes fixed on the curve of his hand beneath the blanket, a hand that had once held mine on long evening walks. When the doctor finished, he glanced at me. "We'll need to confirm the paperwork," he said gently. My daughter inhaled sharply. I exhaled. And though neither of us spoke, the space between us filled with the weight of what had already been sealed inside that envelope. I realized then that this was not just about medical decisions. It was about something larger, about the way she saw me, the way she judged my choices, the way my role as her mother was unraveling in the bright, merciless light of the ICU. And as I stood there, the machines breathing for the man I had spent my life beside, I wondered if I had signed not just for him, but for myself. A quiet rebellion, hidden inside a simple signature. A line drawn, not in ink, but in the fragile bond between mother and daughter. The morning light in hospitals is cruel. It doesn't rise gently like at home, slipping through curtains and painting the floor with gold. It comes in through blinds half closed, harsh and pale, as though the sun itself is afraid to touch this place too tenderly. I sat by his bed, the machines pulsing steady rhythms, and tried not to hear them as stand-ins for his heartbeat. My daughter stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, her stance as rigid as the four-pole beside her. The doctor had left us with more papers, more words about options, more questions I didn't know how to answer. She read each line carefully, lips moving slightly as though reciting to herself. I wanted to ask her what she saw, what she thought the right path was, but the envelope from last night burned in my memory. She didn't trust me anymore. Anything I asked now would sound like an admission of weakness, and I wasn't ready to hand that over. "Mom," she said suddenly, not looking at me, "do you even realize what you signed?" Her voice was flat, but the accusation was heavy. "I realize enough," I said. "That's not an answer." "No," I admitted, "but it's the truth." She finally lifted her eyes to me, and for a fleeting moment I saw the little girl she had been, the one who used to run to me when nightmares woke her, who once believed my presence was the cure for every fear. That girl was gone now, replaced by this woman who looked at me like I was reckless, like I was a stranger she'd been forced to trust against her will. "I should have been the one," she said. "You never think about anyone else when you act. You just," she broke off, shaking her head. I didn't defend myself right away. Maybe because a part of me feared she was right. My whole life, I had made decisions quickly, sometimes instinctively. It was how I had managed our household when her father worked late, how I had handled bills, school forms, emergencies. I didn't wait for permission. I couldn't afford to. But now, in this sterile room, that same decisiveness looked like selfishness in her eyes. "You're his wife," she continued, softer this time. "But I'm his daughter. I should matter too." Her words pierced me. She did matter. She always had. But the truth is, when I stood in that hallway with the envelope, I hadn't thought of her. I had thought of him, of what he would want, of what he had once told me in the quiet of our kitchen after his first scare years ago. He'd said, "If it comes to it, don't let them turn me into a machine." That memory guided my hand more than her whisper had. I wanted to tell her that. I wanted to say, I was carrying out his wish, not mine. But I stopped myself. If I spoke it aloud, it would sound like I was using him as a shield. And maybe I was. She moved closer to the bed, brushing her father's hand with the back of her fingers, as though she was afraid to grip it. Watching her, I felt the distance between us stretch further, like two people clinging to the same man but standing on opposite shores. The day unfolded slowly. Doctors came and went, their updates blurring together. I kept nodding, asking quiet questions, while she interrogated them with sharp precision. I noticed how some of the staff directed their answers toward her more than me, as if she had taken the role of decision-maker without a formal handover. It stung, though I didn't say so. At noon, she suggested I go home to rest. "You're exhausted," she said, almost kindly, though the undertone was clear, she wanted space. "I'll stay," I replied. She didn't argue. Instead, she pulled out her laptop, began typing furiously, probably searching medical journals, legal advice, or maybe just distracting herself. I watched her fingers move, so much like mine when I used to type up work reports in the small hours of the night. It struck me how alike we were, and how that likeness had turned us into opponents rather than allies. The nurse came to adjust his machines, murmuring instructions we barely heard. I sat back, folded my arms, and let myself drift into memory. I thought of the first time I met my husband in the university library. He had leaned across the table, asked if he could borrow my pen, and never gave it back. That small theft had led to a life shared, decades of laughter and arguments, houses bought and sold, a child raised. And now here we were, in a room that smelled of antiseptic, surrounded by equipment more faithful than flesh. My daughter caught me staring at him and said quietly, "You're thinking about before." "Yes," I admitted. She didn't reply. But her silence wasn't hostile this time, it was almost reverent. We sat like that for a long while, both anchored to memories that neither of us dared to speak aloud. By evening, the doctor returned with words I both dreaded and expected. "We need to discuss next steps," he said. His voice was steady, but the phrase itself was a cliff edge. Next steps. My daughter sat straighter, pulling her laptop closer. "What options are left?" The doctor explained, detailing interventions, risks, and likely outcomes. Each word carved into me. I nodded, though the meanings swam together. Then he paused, looked at me directly. "We have your signature," he reminded gently. My daughter froze. Her eyes snapped to me, blazing. "That's why I told you not to sign anything," she whispered, but the whisper was fierce this time, trembling with contained fury. I wanted to reach for her, to take her hand the way I used to when she was a little girl lost in a crowd. But her hands were fists in her lap. There was no reaching her now. The doctor waited for a response neither of us gave. Eventually, he nodded, said he'd give us time, and left. The room fell into heavy silence. The machines beeped, steady and indifferent. "Mom," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Why do you always think you know best? Why can't you ever let someone else have a say?" I looked at her, really looked. She was trembling. Not just from anger but from fear, from the unbearable weight of watching her father fade. In that moment, I saw not just my daughter but a woman who had spent her whole life trying to step out from under my shadow, and failing. "I don't know," I whispered. It was the truest thing I could say. She stared at me, shocked by my honesty, maybe expecting another justification, another wall. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. And in that fragile silence, I realized part 2 of this ordeal wasn't about the man in the bed. It was about us, the living, the ones forced to navigate love and loyalty while standing at the edge of loss. That night, when she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep in the corner chair, I remained awake. I traced the curve of his hand under the blanket with my eyes, memorizing every detail, while her earlier words echoed in my head. "You never think about anyone else when you act." Was that my legacy? A life of decisive choices that left those closest to me feeling unseen? Or was it strength, misinterpreted as selfishness? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: tomorrow would bring more papers, more decisions, more whispers in sterile hallways. And whether she forgave me or not, I would sign again if I believed it was right. Because that was who I was. And maybe that was the very thing breaking us apart. Hospitals don't have nights the way the outside world does. They dim the lights, yes, but the corridors never sleep. Nurses still push carts, monitors still beep, footsteps still echo in uneven rhythms. In that restless half-dark, I sat beside him, my hand resting just inches from his, never quite touching, as if my skin might disturb the fragile balance of machines keeping him here. Across the room, my daughter shifted in the stiff chair, a blanket folded around her shoulders like armor. By morning, we were both frayed. She wanted answers. I wanted silence. That was the rhythm of our days now, her voice sharp with demands, mine heavy with pauses. And threaded between us was the steady mechanical sigh of the ventilator, a cruel metronome reminding us that time was not ours to command. She broke the silence first. "Mom, did he ever tell you what he wanted? Really wanted? Or did you just decide?" I inhaled slowly, staring at the faint stubble along his jaw, the skin pale against the pillow. "He told me enough. That's not what I asked. He said he didn't want to be kept alive by machines." The words scraped my throat. Her face hardened. "And you just decided that means now? You decided this was what he meant?" I signed because I knew his voice even when he couldn't speak. She shook her head, frustration etched in every line of her face. "You hear what you want to hear. You always have." I wanted to snap back, but her words opened something raw inside me. Because maybe she was right. Maybe all my life I had chosen the versions of truth that made survival possible, the versions that kept me moving forward without hesitation. Maybe I had practiced that skill so long it looked like blindness to everyone else. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You know what he told me last year? He said he wasn't ready to go. He said he wanted to see me settle down, start a family. Did you ever think of that when you signed?" The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. "No," I admitted softly. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. "Of course not. Because it's always you deciding what matters." The machines hummed on. My husband's chest rose and fell, steady, unnatural. I felt my pulse echo in my temples. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It was the only thing I had left, but she didn't accept it. She stood abruptly, pacing the small square of linoleum like a caged animal. "Sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't unsign papers." Her footsteps were sharp, slicing the quiet. I watched her and saw not just my daughter, but every argument we had ever had condensed into this moment, her fury at being dismissed, my stubborn refusal to bend. She had inherited my strength but wielded it against me. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked finally. She froze. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Then you'd have everything your way." "No," I said softly. "I'd just like peace." Her laugh was bitter. "Peace? You think there's peace in this?" She gestured at her father, at the machines, at the sterile room. "There's no peace here, Mom. There's only choices. And you took mine away." Her words cut deep. I had always believed motherhood meant making choices no one else could bear. I thought I had carried that weight for her, spared her from it. But now she looked at me as though I had stolen something essential, the right to be heard, the right to share in the burden. She sat again, arms crossed tight. Neither of us spoke for a long while. The silence was not comfortable, it was jagged, full of unsaid words pressing against our chests. When the nurse came to check the 4 lines, she glanced between us, reading the tension like a familiar script. "Families fight," she said gently, adjusting the drip. "It means you both care." I almost laughed. Care didn't feel like the word for what stretched between us. This wasn't tenderness, it was something closer to war, fought in whispers and glares. But I nodded, because nodding was easier than explaining. Later, when my daughter left the room to take a call, I leaned closer to him. His face was so still, the faintest rise and fall of his chest the only proof of life. I whispered, "She hates me right now." My voice cracked. "I don't know how to fix it." The machines answered in their steady rhythm, indifferent. When she returned, her eyes were red, though she pretended otherwise. "That was work," she said quickly, though I hadn't asked. She sat down heavily, avoiding my gaze. I wanted to reach for her hand, but my fingers curled into my lap instead. We stayed like that, 2 women in silence, separated by pride and grief. By evening, the doctor returned. "We'll need another decision soon," he said. His words carried the weight of inevitability. My daughter stiffened. I felt myself sink further into the chair. "We'll talk about it," she said firmly, her tone final. She didn't even glance at me. I realized then how far she had moved beyond me. She wasn't asking me, wasn't including me. She was staking her ground, claiming authority. And maybe she deserved it. But part of me bristled, because I had carried this man's life with mine for decades, and now my daughter wanted to claim the right to decide his death. That night, I left the hospital for the first time in days. I walked home through streets that felt too bright, too alive. People laughed in cafes, couples hurried hand in hand, cars honked impatiently. The world had the audacity to go on, while mine shrank to a hospital room and the rift between me and my daughter. At home, I made tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table where he and I had once argued about bills, about her curfew, about trivial things that seemed monumental at the time. I could almost hear his voice, low and firm, saying, "You're stronger than you know." But strength had turned into stubbornness, and stubbornness had turned my daughter against me. I returned to the hospital at dawn. She was already there, hair pulled back, eyes shadowed with exhaustion but sharp with resolve. She barely acknowledged me. I sat beside him, let the hours stretch. And in that quiet, I understood something painful. This wasn't just about him. This was about her need to be seen, to be equal, to finally stand beside me rather than beneath me. My signature had robbed her of that. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "We'll need to talk about Dad's will. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a line drawn. I nodded slowly, though my stomach nodded. Because I knew this was only the beginning. She waited until the doctor left before saying it again. We need to talk about Dad's will. The word will sat heavy in the room, louder than the machines, louder than my own heartbeat. I had avoided it, skirted around it, convinced myself that focusing on paperwork was a kind of betrayal while he was still breathing, even if the machines were doing the breathing for him. But my daughter had no such hesitation. She spoke with a precision that reminded me of him when he was younger, when he would balance our checkbook with the patience of a man aligning dominoes. I nodded slowly. What about it? Her eyes fixed on mine, steady. I want to see it. I want to know what he decided. I hesitated. The envelope with the will wasn't here, it was at home, in the bottom drawer of my desk, where I had placed it years ago after he and I signed it together. I remembered the day we'd gone to the lawyer's office, our daughter still in college, too young to be pulled into these matters. We'd promised each other then that we'd keep her shielded from the burden until necessary. And now, here we were, necessity staring us in the face. You don't trust me, I said quietly. I don't trust that you'll tell me everything, she replied, her voice sharp, though her eyes softened just slightly. You sign things without asking. You make decisions without explaining. And now it feels like you're shutting me out of Dad's life even before he's gone. The words pierced me. I wanted to protest, to tell her she was wrong, that I had carried the weight of this family for decades, that shielding her had been my way of loving her. But she wouldn't hear it that way. Not now. I'll bring it tomorrow, I said at last. Her shoulders loosened, but only slightly. Thank you. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with things neither of us dared say. I wanted to tell her the truth, that the will wouldn't surprise her, that he had left her more than enough, that he had trusted me to carry the rest. But I stayed quiet. Because in her eyes, explanations had become excuses. That night, after she drifted into a restless sleep in the corner chair, I slipped out of the hospital and walked home again. The house felt cavernous, each room echoing with absence. I went straight to the desk, pulled open the drawer, and stared at the sealed folder. My name was on it, in his handwriting, steady, deliberate. I touched the ink, felt the years collapse in on themselves. I thought of our conversations over the years, the times we had spoken about what would happen if. He had always been practical, grounded. Better to decide now, he'd say, than leave a mess later. I had nodded, grateful for his clarity. But I hadn't imagined sitting across from my daughter, accused of betrayal, while that clarity turned into a wedge between us. The next morning, I carried the folder to the hospital. She was waiting. Her eyes flicked to my hand immediately. You brought it, she said. I handed it to her. She opened it carefully, her lips tightening as she read. I watched her face shift, first concentration, then surprise, then something more complicated. She set the papers down slowly. He trusted you, she whispered. Yes, I said. She shook her head. No, I mean, he really trusted you. More than me. Her words landed heavier than any accusation. Because in them was the truth I had avoided, my husband had seen me as the keeper of our family's future. He had placed more on my shoulders than perhaps I deserved. And my daughter saw it now, not as an honor, but as proof that she was secondary, overlooked. He didn't mean it that way, I said quickly. Didn't he? Her voice cracked. I was always the afterthought. You two decided everything, schools, holidays, even what I wore for graduation pictures. And now this. Even in his will, I'm not the one he trusted. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back, clutching the papers as though they might vanish. You think I don't see it? She continued, her voice rising. You've always been the one in charge, and I've always been the one waiting for scraps of control. Well, not anymore. I won't let you sign away the last pieces of him without me. Her defiance was fire, burning years of silence into ash. I sat back, stunned, but also, strangely, proud. Because for the first time, she wasn't just whispering. She was claiming her voice. The doctor interrupted us again, offering updates that barely registered. When he left, the silence that followed was different. Not jagged this time, but raw, like the air after a storm. She folded the papers carefully, placed them back in the folder, and set it between us. From now on, she said, we decide together. Her tone was firm, but beneath it I heard the plea, see me. Let me matter. I nodded. Together. It should have been a moment of healing, but instead it felt fragile, temporary. Because deep inside, I knew old habits don't vanish with one word. I had been decisive all my life, she had been sidelined all hers. Saying together was easy. Living it would be harder. That evening, as we sat by his bed, she began to tell me stories, small, tender memories of her father. How he once stayed up all night helping her finish a school project, how he taught her to drive in the church parking lot, how he cried quietly at her college graduation when he thought no one was looking. I listened, tears filling my eyes, because I hadn't known some of those stories. He had given her moments that belonged only to them, just as he had given me ones that belonged only to us. And in that sharing, I realized something, maybe the will wasn't about trust at all. Maybe it was just practical. Maybe what mattered more were these memories, these invisible inheritances he had left behind. But my daughter didn't see it that way yet. Not fully. She held the folder tightly, as if it were proof of a wound that would never heal. As the night deepened, we both sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't war. It was exhaustion. We were two women holding vigil, both loving the same man, both grieving him while he still breathed. And in that quiet, I finally dared to whisper the words I had held back for days. I'm scared too. Her eyes flicked to mine, startled. For a moment, she softened. Then she leaned back, closing her eyes, as if she couldn't bear to let me see her crumble. But I had seen it. And for the first time in days, I felt a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The next morning, the ICU felt different. It wasn't quieter, hospitals are never truly quiet, but the sound seemed sharper, as if the machines had learned to mimic urgency. The nurses moved quickly, their shoes whispering over the linoleum, their faces carrying that professional mask that always revealed more than it hid. Something was shifting, and we both knew it. My daughter arrived early, coffee in hand, her hair pulled back tight. She looked like a woman preparing for battle. I recognized the set of her jaw, it was mine, years younger. She handed me the other cup without a word. It was bitter, too strong, but I drank it anyway. It felt like a truce. The doctor came not long after. His words were careful, measured, but the meaning was simple. My husband was slipping, the machines were carrying more of the load, and soon even they would not be enough. My daughter's eyes darted to me. For the first time, there was no anger in them, only fear. She asked questions, technical ones, practical ones, but the answers didn't matter. The truth was already written across his still face. When the doctor left, she sat heavily in the chair, hands clenched around the paper cup. I don't know what to do, she whispered. It was the first time she'd admitted uncertainty. For days, she had stood tall, demanding, accusing, commanding. Now she looked small, fragile, like the little girl I once held through fevered nights. I reached for her hand, expecting her to pull away as she always had, but this time she let me hold it. You don't have to know, I said softly. We'll carry it together. She exhaled, a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. The hours that followed were heavy with waiting. We spoke little, but when we did, it wasn't about papers or signatures. She told me about a dream she'd had the night before, where her father was standing in the garden, trimming roses the way he always had, humming under his breath. I told her how, years ago, he had once stayed up all night fixing a broken kitchen chair because he refused to admit defeat to a loose screw. We laughed quietly at that, the sound strange in the sterile room. For a fleeting moment, we were simply two people who loved the same man. But the truce was fragile. By afternoon, the doctor returned with another envelope. This one was different, final, binding. Consent for withdrawal. My daughter froze when she saw it. Her eyes flicked to me, wide, desperate. "Not yet," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "Please, not yet." I felt the weight of the paper in my hands. The envelope seemed heavier than it should have been, as though it carried the whole of our marriage, the whole of her childhood, everything we had ever been as a family. I didn't open it. I placed it gently on the bedside table. "We don't have to decide this minute," I said. She sagged in her chair, relief flooding her features. But I knew the reprieve was temporary. Time was running out, and soon the decision would not wait for us. That night, she suggested we both go home for a few hours. It was the first suggestion she'd made that wasn't sharp, wasn't laced with accusation. Just human exhaustion. At home, we moved through the rooms together, silent but companionable. She paused at the mantel where photographs of her father smiled down at us, one of him holding her as a toddler, another of him in his uniform, another of all three of us at her college graduation. She touched the frame lightly, her fingers trembling. "I don't want to lose him," she said, her voice small. "Neither do I whispered. We didn't talk about the will, or the signatures, or the fights. We just stood there, staring at the captured fragments of a man who was slipping away from us piece by piece. When we returned to the hospital, the night nurse greeted us with a solemn nod. "He's stable for now," she said, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Stability was temporary. We sat through the night, taking turns dozing in the chair, waking at every change in the machine's rhythm. At one point, I woke to find her holding his hand, her head bowed against the blanket. She didn't notice me watching, and I didn't speak. It felt like trespassing on a sacred moment that belonged to them alone. By dawn, the doctor returned again. "It's time to think seriously," he said gently. This time, my daughter didn't argue. She nodded slowly, eyes brimming with tears. She looked at me, waiting. And in that glance, I understood, for all her fury, all her accusations, she still wanted me beside her. She didn't want to carry this alone. We held hands, our fingers trembling together, as the doctor explained the process. I barely heard the words. All I knew was that the signature would come, and it would be the hardest thing I had ever done. After he left, my daughter whispered, "Can you do it?" I looked at her, at the woman who had once been my little girl, and I said, "Only if you do it with me." She nodded. We sat there for a long while, hands clasped, the envelope between us. Neither of us moved. The machines hummed on, steady, indifferent. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I knew this, for the first time in days, maybe years, we were finally standing on the same side. The envelope lay on the table between us, thin but impossibly heavy. My daughter's hand rested near mine, our fingers almost touching. We had circled around this moment for days, arguing, retreating, accusing. Now there was nothing left to say. Only the decision. The doctor waited quietly, his presence steady but respectful. The machines filled the silence, their mechanical rhythm reminding us of what was borrowed, not earned. I stared at my husband's face, pale and still, his chest rising and falling in perfect, unnatural time. For years, I had read his moods in the lines of his forehead, the set of his mouth. Now there was nothing to read. Only absence. My daughter squeezed my hand. "We can do it together," she whispered. I nodded. My voice wouldn't come, but my hand moved, steady as it had the first night when I signed against her wishes. Only this time, her hand was there too. We signed side by side, two signatures on a single line, our names joined in a way they hadn't been in years. When it was done, I felt a strange release. Not relief, never relief, but a loosening, as though I had been holding my breath for too long. My daughter exhaled too, a sound caught somewhere between grief and surrender. The doctor took the papers gently, nodded, and left us to our vigil. We stayed. We stayed as the machines were dialed back, as the rhythm slowed, as the line between life and leaving blurred. My daughter held his hand, and I held hers. We watched together, silent, as the man who had shaped both our lives slipped quietly into memory. There was no drama, no sudden gasp, only stillness. And then a silence deeper than any silence I had ever known. She broke first, pressing her forehead to his hand, her shoulders shaking. I didn't try to stop her. I simply placed my hand on her back, feeling her grief roll through her in waves. For the first time in so long, she didn't resist my touch. She leaned into it. We left the hospital hours later, the morning sun glaring against the world that dared to keep turning. The city moved on, cars honking, people rushing, unaware of the line we had just crossed. We walked side by side, slower than usual, like two women learning how to share the same rhythm. At home, she went straight to the mantel and picked up the photo of her father holding her as a toddler. She traced the frame with her thumb. "He loved us both so much," she said softly. "Yes," I whispered. "And now it's on us to love each other enough to carry him forward." She turned then, her eyes red but clear, and for the first time since that first night in the ICU hallway, I saw not anger, not accusation, but recognition. She nodded. That evening, after she had gone to rest, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The house was unbearably quiet, but not empty. His absence was everywhere, yet so was his presence, in the chair he'd once repaired, in the roses outside that still bloomed, in the daughter who finally stood beside me rather than across from me. Loss does not end, it only changes shape. And as I stared into the fading light, I understood that signing my name had never been about endings. It had been about carrying forward. About giving him dignity, and giving us the chance to begin again. I placed the pen down on the table and let my hand rest still. For the first time in days, I felt steady. Because love, I realized, is not in the signatures we fight over, it's in the hands we keep holding when the ink has dried.